in looking at grocery store data, we were surprised when we found that there was a high correlation of people who were buying pie filling and powdered milk. And the people in the grocery store business were scratching their head telling us that doesn't make any sense to me. Why are we going to do that? And when we stood up a pie fillings, display in the aisle right next to the powdered milk, well, what do you know? They sold a lot more pie filling.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Life would be so easy if we had to sell only to one ideal customer profile and buyer persona. Most companies sell to multiple ideal customer profiles. That makes the job of a marketer much harder. These profiles could vary based on industries, roles, product groups, etc. But what is so hard about managing multiple customer profiles? Well, each customer profile has its needs in terms of what they like about their buying preferences and the messaging that will resonate with them the most. Each customer profile may have its own journey, even if they might be buying the same product or service offering. If you don't map the journey of each customer profile individually, you might struggle to get results from your e-commerce efforts, even if your overall messaging may be okay. In today's episode, we invited a panel of cross-functional experts for a live interview on LinkedIn who brings significant expertise to discuss how to manage multiple customer groups. We discussed the differences between the traditional versus the digital world and how the challenges differ in both settings, while the problem of multiple personas exists in both worlds. Finally, we discussed the best practices of segmentation and identifying the user personas for several categories, including logged in versus non-logged in users or buyers versus users. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello everyone, welcome to today's show. And if you are joining for the first time, this is part of our e-commerce series for which we meet every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to e-commerce, and we always have a very exciting panel that is willing to share their insights and wisdom. For today, we are going to be talking about a very exciting topic because this is one of the most complex topic, even though it is not supposed to be that difficult, but most companies struggle with it. When you are going to be serving multiple customers, it's very, very, very hard to map those customer journeys and have a very clear path what customers are expecting from your web presence or from your e-commerce presence that you might have. So first, we are going to start with everybody's intro and we are going to dig right into the topic right after that. So I am going to start with my intro. If you guys don't know me, I am Sam Gupta. I am principal at Elevate IQ. I have roughly 20 plus years of experience leading ERP and digital transformation engagement. E-commerce is always a key part of that. And if we don't have the journeys figured out, obviously the e-commerce results are not going to be there. So whatever you are going to do for the back end is probably not going to work. As part of Elevate IQ, we are an independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. What that means for the customers is we help them with the business case development, business process re-engineering, anything and everything that happens in the pre-ERP phase, which is going to be defining the business architecture, the enterprise architecture, the ERP project recovery, and the ERP implementation. On that note, I am going to move to Steve for his intro.
Hi, thank you, Sam. It's good to see Ben, Dave, and Chris on here as well. Appreciate you having me on. My name is Steve Rice. I'm from .com Jungle and the Globally Conscious Leader. And at .com Jungle, we're a technology implementation company that helps businesses make and implement wise technology choices. And sometimes that ends up being websites. Sometimes that means integration with ERPs and HubSpot and other things like that. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much for being here, Steve. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you to introduce next, if you don't mind.
Sure, Sam. Thank you for having me. Great to see everyone here today. Yes, Chris Harrington, president of Gen Alpha Technologies. Essentially, we help original equipment manufacturers, aftermarket organizations, and specialty vehicle companies sell and service their products online. And I will tell you that they have a complex customer structure. So certainly we do find lots of these challenges as we work with different organizations. So great to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. I think it's going to be really exciting. And don't blame me if we get into the channel conflict today as well, because it always ends up there. Thank you so much for being here. All right, Dave, can I ask you to introduce yourself next, if you don't mind?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Sam, and good to see everybody. My name is Dave Chrysler, and I own an operations consulting company working with business leaders to help them achieve operational excellence through planning, people, process, and technology. And I come to you today with more than 20 years in operations, specifically within manufacturing. So excited to be here, Sam. Thanks.
Okay, and I'm super excited as well. Thank you so much for being here, Dave. Ben, joining for the first time, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Ben Rudnick, and thank you very much for having me. I work with atwix.com. We're an e-commerce agency that is focused on delivering Magento solutions, both with the Community Edition and the Adobe Commerce Enterprise Edition. And I also have been playing in the e-commerce world for 20 years plus. I got my start in personalization and segmentation, so building customer groups is near and dear to my heart.
Thank you so much for being here, Ben. So now we are going to start with our first question. But before we do that, if you are in the audience and listening to this conversation, if you have any comments or question, please make sure you are going to be commenting in the comment box. We are going to be reviewing all of those comments, and we'll try our best to address all of the questions. If we run out of the time, then our panelists will make sure that they are going to get back to you for your questions. On that note, I am going to start with the first question. So the question for you, Steve, is going to be, when we are dealing with the multiple customer groups, as we know, it's not a fun exercise because they all require their own customer journeys. The majority of the manufacturing companies and the retail companies, they struggle in defining the ideal customer profile. But here we are talking about multiple ideal customer profile. Obviously, that is hard. So do you want to talk about the challenges and maybe share a story of how the multiple customers were structured in the business that you worked with?
Sure. I'm only going to challenge you in one spot there because you said it's not fun. It actually can be fun for geeks. So, yeah, I think you pointed out one of the main ones that manufacturers have is they have a completely different ideal customer profile from their wholesale customers than they do from their retail customers. And that's pretty straightforward, but I think people get all wound up pretty tight when they start trying to figure out, what do we do? And one of the stories that I have, just using those two and having two competing interests in the company sort of fighting over what they thought was the right user experience, is that the wholesale folks had a problem because their dealers kept going to the retail website and just couldn't seem to find the big red dealer link, no matter where we put it on the website. And so they really wanted to push for a landing page on the homepage of the direct-to-consumer website that said, are you a dealer or are you a retailer? Well, the direct-to-consumer folks and us as advocates for both sides said, hey, wait a second. You want to completely destroy the user experience of your retail consumer just so your dealers can find the right spot. So from a user experience standpoint, what they actually had was a communication problem with their dealers that the dealer team wasn't taking responsibility for in terms of emails that they sent out on a regular basis. They weren't really communicating with dealers. And what the retail side had, the consumer side, was a very good and extensive both paid and organic search engine marketing that basically put them at the top of almost every search result for things related to that company. So that's sort of an example of the two obvious things that would get mixed up, and how one team might say, hey, we want to do this thing to fix our problem, and the other team saying, hey, wait a second, you're ruining ours.
Yeah, I completely agree with that story, to be honest. And I am definitely not going to use that site, to be honest, if it is going to be 50,000 questions before I can see my products. Okay, I am
Exactly.
looking for slightly more streamlined customer experience. In my experience, typically you go by the 80-20 rules. If 80% of the customers are going to be relevant for your direct to consumer, then maybe you want to cater them and then have a link somewhere for your 20% customers because you don't care for them as much. In this context, again, maybe you have far larger market share, but as far as the web experience goes, maybe you don't care for that as much. Steve, I am actually going to have a clarifying question for you, which is
Okay.
going to be one of the things, the reason why companies struggle with the web journey is because sometimes they cannot really mimic and relate with the traditional experience. It's not that we did not have this problem in the traditional world. It's just that, a lot of human and the manual processes were involved. So you didn't realize that you had this problem. Okay, you have multiple personas in the traditional channel as well. So do you want to touch and compare the traditional versus the online world, why the problem is far more severe in the online world as opposed to the traditional world?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the severity comes because if you sell I don't know, knives or widgets for the outdoor store, you're going to go to a trade show. You're not going to meet consumers there, so you don't have to worry about whether they show up at your booth, and are going to try and buy stuff at wholesale. So on the web, you have that concern. And you also have the concern that your dealers are going to show up on a retail website and say, I don't really know where to go. But the way I would look at it is also to say going fully digital actually presents a lot of opportunities that we don't think about. For instance, the digital system doesn't care what you look like, how you're dressed, what your hair color is, whether you're male, female, 6 feet tall, unless you ask it to, right? So mostly what we care about is this a good customer and what are their habits? And whether they're a dealer or a consumer, we're trying to measure that. That's what Google and Amazon and Facebook and everyone else. That's the holy grail. So in a certain sense, the opportunity to identify online someone who's more likely to spend money, I think, is easier than say put yourself in the middle of an REI in Idaho. You've got a salesperson with 3 months experience, maybe who's been rock climbing for 5 years, but has never been in a retail environment. They don't know when the millionaire doctor walks through the door and wants to drop $10,000 on mountain bikes, right? So as far as user experience for, not user experience, but yeah, I guess user experience for the
Journey.
doctor
Yeah.
themselves, their journey is different. You might actually be able to identify that person digitally. You cannot expect a retail person. You might not even be able to expect your 20-year experience dealer services rep at a trade show to recognize as well. So that's one of the stories I would tell. What do you think, Sam?
Okay, I think you did amazing. Thank you so much, Steve. So, okay, I'm actually gonna move to Chris. Chris, okay, so we are talking about the multiple customers and the multiple personas. And in your world, I think you're probably going to have a million personas, and they are going to have millions of journeys, to be honest. So obviously, it is very complicated, and I'm pretty sure your world is still very traditional, and these personas and the journeys, they existed in the traditional world as well. So when you compare the traditional versus web world, what are the differences that you are seeing, and what are some of the challenges that you typically notice while managing these multiple customer journeys in the web experience?
Yeah, since we're talking about challenges as these companies move to digital e-commerce, because we're really focused on e-commerce right now, I think a lot of it has to do with the control of data. Okay, so data and product information was so tightly controlled by manufacturers historically, and often controlled through silos in a manufacturing organization, and wasn't really even needed to be collated and easily accessible to all the different potential channels that are using their products, right? So when a manufacturer says, I'm going to move online, now this data is expected from all these different user groups, right? So you have the end user who uses the product, that is the customer who owns, operates, if it's a manufacturing piece of equipment, right? You have a dealer distribution network who's selling and servicing those products. They require different types of information. So access to information they need might be different than the access that a manufacturer is willing to give to that end user, but still that end user is starting to realize that they want more access to that information. So making it available and how to make it available becomes part of that challenge and part of that customer journey flow. And then you have, manufacturers who have fleet customers who they may do business with direct rather than going through a distribution partner because they own large volumes of product. Maybe they're using it for rental facilities, or they just have large fleets that they're owning and operating and servicing other businesses. So now they have to be able to do business and provide data and information to those customers when and how they need it. And then you have all of your internal stakeholder customers, those that are servicing your dealers or servicing the end customer. Sometimes that's your sales team. It can be your technical service team. So all of these groups, right? You could call them customers of your digital solution who need product data at any given moment. And the biggest challenge for companies today is, what permissions do we give these different segments, and how will we feed them that information so that it's seamless for everybody that needs it? So I think that's a big challenge. And because manufacturers were able to take the phone calls and the emails and other things and kind of control that product data, but now end users are more empowered and they want that data, or they're going to go elsewhere. That has created the challenge. What do we do when we've historically gone to market this way? So that's what I would say. I think I agree with everything you and Steve were saying, and I just wanted to add that component of data because I think that becomes the challenge.
So, Chris, I'm going to be honest here. Today, I was not expecting the data plug, but, since you started, then I am actually going to make it even with the ERP question. Sorry, I was hoping that we'll probably talk about just the user experience and the customer journeys. But now that we are talking about data, so now you are going to get a little bit of slightly more ERP-centric question. But obviously, it is going to be related to the customer journeys. So here, the journeys that you are talking about, you have many different personas there. And these personas, if you actually think about them, you have the end consumer, you have the dealer and distributor, and then you have the internal users as well. And again, in your case, when you are trying to enable this experience, my assumption is going to be that a lot of this is going to be in the logged in instance where they are able to see the data once they have either bought or they have the account, as opposed to just looking at the non-logged in instance of the website. So now when you look at all of these parties, a lot of the underlying ERP systems, they don't really track all of these parties. So how do you connect all of this experience and make sure that you are providing the personalized data, because that is going to affect the customer journey? So how do you make sure that all of these personas are going to be tied together as part of one transaction, because they all are part of the same transaction, because they are probably trying to repair the same fleet? So how do you typically address this challenge?
Yeah, I think it comes through decisions that companies need to make on how they're going to go to market, right? Okay. So you will have users, again, we'll call it the anonymous, not logged in user, right? Yeah. And a manufacturer or any company needs to decide what level of information are they going to give that non-logged in user, anonymous user. Maybe they're going to give them all kinds of product data that wasn't easily accessible before, but they're not going to be able to find price or availability, and they're going to have to contact a dealer or go to a location to get products. So we've talked a little bit about this in previous episodes, but that's how some manufacturers, that's a first step that they're taking so that they can protect the channels that they're working with. So that segment is called the end user who might be operating a product, but the manufacturer doesn't know them, they don't have an account with them, they're going to allow them to search, find, get information, but then go to the dealer. The other segments, those accounts that are already doing business, again, that could be a fleet in this example, it could be a distributor, they are already mapped in the ERP system with their own pricing, with the types of information that they need. So dealers might have access to documentation and may have different access to, let's call it portals, or I'm going to call it warranty, return, surplus return type information that a dealer has turned on when they log in, because the system recognizes them as a dealer. So they're segmented so that the dealer can see their pricing, they see list price, they see their price, they can process warranty claims, they can process RMAs, they can do all of those different things. Now, when a fleet customer logs in, they're not going to have access to all the modules. They're going to be able to see their pricing, they're going to be able to order history, order status, all of that. So the segmentation defines the type of customer, but the access, the roles, and the permission will be what they do when they're on the site. And that's how you control it and still get data to the users as you're transitioning your digital strategy.
All right, amazing insights. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Dave, I'm actually going to come to you, and I'm super worried right now because, to be honest, I mean, this is supposed to be a marketing show, but we have too many operations people here, and then Ben is going to provide a lot of insights from the data and AI, so this is probably going to become data show. Okay, so hopefully we can stick to marketing. All right, so multiple customer groups, Dave, and the challenges, and how would you contrast this experience with the traditional versus the web experience?
Yeah, I mean, so much great information shared so far by everybody, Steve, Chris, and yourself. And yeah, it was, I couldn't help but chuckle a little bit as some of the data points were popping up. But I think from my standpoint and experience, it really comes back to exactly what you said, taking those traditional processes and pathways for that user experience and translating them into the digital environment. And the companies that I've worked with, typically we're seeing, I would say a minimum of 2 customer groups. It's going to be, a distributor group and potentially an end user group. In kind of tacking on to some of what Chris was saying in terms of the data side of things, and how you control that information flow. I mean, obviously it's going to impact all of that user experience from the information they're seeing, the sales prices that are available, how much access to not only if we're talking about manufacturing, like in Chris's world with the OEM side, specifications and detailed level drawings and all of those things. But again, it is how you want to be able to control that experience with that individual segmented group. And then again, from my standpoint, taking a step back before we even really talk about the technology side and making sure that we are doing the process documentation and understanding what that journey, from an ideal perspective, should look like compared to maybe where it's at today. Because as now is the opportunity to take a look at that and identify potential roadblocks in the traditional process as we integrate and move towards a digital environment. And if oftentimes, at least what I've seen, is companies that have already implemented on the digital side that haven't taken the time to fully understand what that journey looks like and who those individual personas are, end up kind of in Steve's example of having the, well, why can't we just, make this quick change? And you've got those conflicting groups internally now who are fighting for, ultimately control of how that platform looks and what that experience is, and potentially impacting significantly the operations side of things because you're making kind of a poor choice based on a really limited amount of information.
Okay, very interesting. So now, I mean, obviously, you are talking about the implications on the operation side as well. And I don't know if the listeners are really going to be familiar with the implications of the incorrect customer journeys, and if they are going to have any sort of implications on the operation side. I can see that you might probably not get the sales order, the visitors might drop out just because they are not finding the right information that they are expecting with the right number of clicks. Okay, the speed is also important. How quickly they expect to find the information on the site. If they are not finding, then they might drop out. But to your comment related to operations, so how do you see the implications on operations? Let's say if you cannot figure out your customer journeys for multiple groups.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to impact everything at the highest level and kind of most impactful, right? We're talking about lost sales, lost profitability. We could be talking about, depending on the specific type of organization, we could be talking about, severe cash flow impact because, you forecasted a particular amount of sales and inventory hold. And now because you have maybe haphazardly documented what that customer journey is like, ultimately losing those opportunities because somebody's coming to the site, they're not finding what they need, they drop, you have no process in place to be able to, and again, depending on if they're logged in versus not logged in, but you lose the ability to track that interaction and then follow up with a new touch point. So at the highest level, we're talking about a severe impact to your revenue and profitability. And, as you kind of cut down through that, you could be talking about many, many different things throughout the operation that it could ultimately impact.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Dave. So, Ben, I'm actually going to come to you. So we are talking about the multiple customer groups, and in your case, since you focus primarily on the personalization, obviously this is super critical when you are mapping that. So when you compare this with the traditional world, what differences do you find, and what challenges do you typically see that companies run into when they are trying to cater to multiple customer groups?
Well, it's kind of fun because I've been doing personalization so long that it pre-existed, before the internet, right? I was doing personalization for hospitality, gaming, grocery store chains, right? You had a card loyalty program. So in the traditional world, one of the biggest differences, even when you're dealing with group customers, is that in the traditional world, somebody has to walk out of the store in order to walk into another store, right? And in the digital world, they might already have another store open in another tab. So one of the biggest important things to focus on is the user experience and making it so that it's engaging and compelling to the buyer, because it's so easy for them to be buying someplace else.
I completely agree. And the friction is, in my opinion, I think it's a great comment. And this is something that most people don't realize, that in this particular case, you really don't have to put as much effort to go to your competitor. When you are actually doing in the traditional world, you are definitely driving to a different place. And that's a lot of effort. And sometimes you are probably going to pay a lot more, to be honest. I mean, I pay a lot more because I just don't want to waste my time and I don't want to go to another store. Do you have any specific stories that you might be able to share, Ben, related to multiple customer groups where you have seen some challenges?
Well, I've been doing this for a little while, so I've got plenty of stories for you. Some of them are more or less appropriate for this forum. But let's say that one of the things I was dealing with most recently is a website that sells car parts.
Okay.
And it doesn't take but a few clicks for you to understand what kind of car parts a person is interested in, right? What type of vehicle they're working on. And so after that, it's very easy to begin showing them targeted content that is relevant, right? It's all about coming up with a customer journey. One of the challenges people have often is that analysis paralysis kind of situation that Steve was mentioning, where people don't know which way to go, right? Or the people in the business, they don't know which groups are the right groups to start with, right? We aren't doing anything with segmentation today. How do we start? And the key way to do that, I find, is taking a look at, sorry to bring it back around, but to look at the data, right? Actually look at your customers and how they're already navigating through your site. Yeah. So they'll tell you what matters, right? One of the things that, you asked for challenges and fun stories, I'll take it way back into the history. In looking at grocery store data, we were surprised when we found that there was a high correlation of people who were buying pie filling and powdered milk. And the people in the grocery store business were scratching their head telling us that doesn't make any sense to me. why are we going to do that? And when we stood up a pie fillings, display in the aisle right next to the powdered milk, well, what do you know? They sold a lot more pie filling, right? And this was something that came out of the algorithms as identified as something that would provide big lift because it was not an obvious thing. And when we actually interviewed customers, the buyers, to figure out why, we realized that the people who had the propensity to buy both, they were people who like to bake a lot. And they weren't necessarily using them together at the same time, but they were the type of people who would use both.
Very, very interesting story. Thank you so much, Ben, for that. So, Steve, I'm actually going to come to you next for the next segment. And since we are talking about data analysis and paralysis, typically, in my experience, the companies that really struggle in defining their customer journeys, they just don't think through enough in terms of what customer journeys they want to have. Some of the larger sophisticated companies, they really have their the roles figured out. Okay, which are the roles that are approaching, and they will tell you, okay, sales, marketing, digital, IT. They are going to have industry, they are going to have products, depending upon which industry you are in. But they have all of the journeys figured out in the menu itself. So when you segment, and I am looking for some stories if you have, where they could not really segment or they did not have the right segmentation, the way journey should have been. For example, some people just copy paste, which is a great strategy to implement your marketing. Just because everybody is going with the industry, maybe have the industry, but that may not make sense for your offering or for your category. So in your experience, when you look at the segmentation of these categories that you want to have for the journeys, what will be the rationale that you are going to use? And if you can share some of the story, good versus bad, that'll be amazing.
Okay. So just to clarify, it sounds like you're asking what are the rationalizations for the types of segmentations you would make, and what could those segmentations be?
Yeah. So basically, either you are going to be succeeding in identifying the journey or you are not. So what is the rationale that you are going to use? And if you have any stories where, people just did not get it or they got it.
Well, I'll say, you're right. People, you said that, people get kind of mixed up trying to figure out what their target audience is and what those, individual user profiles might be.
Yeah.
And I liked Ben's story because it reminded me of Hayden Christensen's Jobs to Be Done and the milkshake story. And I'll let people Google that. But basically, he was trying to understand, like Ben was saying, why are people buying, what was it, sweetened condensed milk or no, powdered milk? When you find out why they're there, that's the what's the real job to be done? What I would say, part of the answer to that, Sam, your original question, is there are a lot of ways to segment from a marketing perspective. And you could, we talked about retailers versus dealers or by groups. You also could possibly segment by platinum, gold, and silver. You just of course have to decide what your parameters are for those people to be in there. It's possible you have products that are relevant to certain locations in the world. So you might actually be segmenting by destination of where you're shipping something. Subscribers versus non-subscribers. One of the things I would point out to, if we're talking about manufacturers and retailers, you're automatically, if you're doing it correctly, you're automatically identifying your segmentation, or at least one of the ways you can segment, by architecting the navigation of your website correctly. And offline here, Ben mentioned backpacking and traveling, and I come from the outdoor world. If you go to an outdoor website, or you go to REI physically, we'll go back to them. Somebody who river rafts might not give a rat's darn about rock climbing, and that's why the rock climbing department and the river rafting departments at REI are not mixed together, and it's why you won't find high carbon Werner paddles in the rock climbing department on REI.com. It's also why you won't find women's rock climbing tank tops mixed in with men's sleeping bags. We're just getting kind of like hyperbolic here. Women, to be a great example of segmentation, women do not shop the same as men. And men do not want to see women's clothing in the men's department, and men do not want to see women's clothing in their department, right? So you're automatic. If you're a retailer and you've got a bunch of stuff, you got to look right at your segmentation on your website and look at your architecture, because that might be telling your marketing team what to do. And if your marketing team is running around scratching their head going, we don't know what our segmentation is, maybe have them talk to the person who architected the website. So because there are a lot of ways to segment your people that you're and your customers. Now, actually, let's use stakeholders because I think that's a better term. We've all identified stakeholders who aren't direct to consumer folks. So, like you said, don't get wound up about it. Just start thinking about it. Look at your website. As Ben says, let the data tell you. You could look at the data and know that men might not be buying. Don't want to see women's clothing in the men's department, but data also says that women buy something like 67 or 70% of men's clothing, but they don't want to see it in the women's department.
Yeah, so some very interesting stories there, and those are real life examples. So thank you so much for bringing those. One of the interesting comments that you made is going to be architecting the navigation, and I think that is spot on. The insight that I need from your side is going to be, so okay, if the marketing team does not have a clue how to segment this, then obviously they are going to go to their website team. And 70% of the cases, they are probably going to be designed by the IT team, and obviously they have very little understanding of how the real world works. To be honest, I mean, unless they are speaking to the customer on a daily basis, which is very rare. So now, if you are actually going to go to your website and the IT team, and you are going to mimic the experience that is just thought out in a room, and nobody really knows whether customers are really succeeding with their journeys on the website. So how would you it seems like a chicken and egg problem. Marketing team does not know. Now you are going to the website, which is probably really bad. So you are going to inherit that, and then you are not going to get the customer journeys. So how do you resolve this chicken and egg problem?
It's a great question because a lot of people have that. They think, well, Ben and I and everybody else here can say, well, look at the data all day long. But if you have data based on a ridiculous architecture and you go into Google Analytics and you think you're going to get the answer to what you want, what you have is the answer to what you had, not what you're going to get.
Yep.
So my answer is going to be you actually should pick up the phone and talk to those stakeholders. And I'll give an example. We recently did some work. This is a dealer example, but I think it applies to a retail environment as well. And I know that certainly as a retailer, if somebody from LL Bean called me and actually said, "Hey, did you have a good experience?" I would be like, "Wow, thanks for calling," and I would answer any questions they wanted, right? But so we built a customized dealer portal for a company that we work with. And the first thing that we asked in the very first meeting is, as part of discovery, we want to get in touch with 5 of the people that you think are your best dealers, and 5 of the people, and of course we won't tell them this, that you think are not your best customers, people you think aren't your best customers. We want to know. And they said, we absolutely do not want to do that. We know everything there is to know about our company and our dealer relationships. Believe me, we talk to these people all day long, right? And we fought and fought, took it up the ladder, and we lost that battle. Well, the very first trade show that this company went to, this is post-COVID or mid-COVID or whatever you want to call it, hadn't been trade shows for a while. They went to a trade show, the dealers did, and it was about a month after they launched. And lo and behold, they had a bunch of their best customers come to them with a list of things that they thought they should have done on their latest update of their dealer website. So we ended up getting what we wanted, but it was a year later, and at the behest of the customer. And all we said to our client was, let's ask your customers what's right, not pretend that we know what's right based on what's happened in the past. That's the answer to the chicken and the egg scenarios. Go straight to the stakeholder and ask them what they want.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for the insights. Chris, so I'm actually going to come to you. So when you actually go to a website, you can clearly tell that it is very unnatural. It does not feel very natural. And as we all know, the marketing is going to be very expensive. So when you look at the segmentation, obviously segmentation requires a lot of research. It requires deep understanding of your customers. It requires a lot of thinking before you are able to map those customer journeys. So in your experience, what rationale would you use? How would you help the marketing versus IT in defining the segmentation when you are starting to map your multiple customers?
Yeah, I would go back to what Steve had said about why are they there? Okay. So, I described different types of customers earlier, but within those customers, you have different segments like a purchaser, right? A buyer inside a B2B organization is going to potentially use your site differently than a maintenance technician or an engineer who's looking for specification data, right? So that purchaser typically has already entered a purchase order into their own back-end system, and they don't want the redundancy of having to peck and find, search for a product in your search tool, and then add it to the shopping cart, search for a tool, add it. So where mistakes have been made or customer experiences have been not well taken care of are when there aren't tools available on your website for that type of user, right? That purchaser who's already got their PO entered in their own system. They simply want a tool to be able to upload their parts or products that they need, get price and availability, add them to the shopping cart, and be on their way, right? So I have seen mistakes made there in that customer journey mapping when solutions like that aren't available for the customer. Same with an engineer who's looking to spec a product into a unit that they may buy your product at a later point in time, but their first step is to come to your website and match specifications for something that they may be building that's going into a larger unit. So for them, output might be a CAD file or some other technical documentation that allows them to spec it in. And then when it is time, they sell the thing that they spec'd it into. Now their purchasing group is going to come back to you because they've spec'd you into their product, and the buying experience is going to be different because they're going to have that part number and they're going to do that. But the first engineer had to go and identify your product that fit the solution they were looking for. Again, if I go to, and again, if companies don't think about the first step is the CAD file or the specification document that they need to spec it into their product, that's what they first needed before they were ever going to buy. So these are the customer journey maps that companies have to think about as they're identifying and solving problems for all the different users. Again, maintenance technician, he or she is going to be repairing something and looking for maintenance instructions and also identification of the product that they need so that they can give it to the purchaser, because often these maintenance technicians don't have authority to buy. So again, they're going to come into your website. They're going to have their own customer journey. They need to be able to maybe find a serial number, VIN number for the model that they own. They need maintenance instructions. They need the products to do the work. They might need a kit or a bundle of items that are going to support them, but they're not going to buy. So they might put it into a quotation that can then easily be shared with the purchaser, and all they have to do is turn that quote into an order. But this is the customer journey, and this is where I see the mistakes being made by companies is they're not thinking about all the different users that will come to the site and the different information they need to ultimately end up getting the conversion. So that's how I would answer your question, Sam.
Yeah, so great depiction of these stories. I think, the journeys are amazing. But in your example, when I look at these journeys, they seem to be the journeys when you already know who these users are and the customers are. Typically, in my experience, when I am looking for the multiple customer groups, the problems that companies face is going to be when you don't know who your visitors are.
Sure.
Because you don't know whether it is going to be the maintenance technician or is it going to be the purchasing, because they are coming for the first time, they are not logged in yet, you don't know who they are. Now figure out I think that's where the trick is in terms of mapping the multiple customer journeys, and that's where I think companies really struggle. Do you have any insights there by any chance? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say those three scenarios can happen before a customer is even your customer. So they may not have an account with you and they're still a buyer, and they've been still given. So that maintenance person ended up with your piece of equipment in their shop, and now they need the resources, and all they know is that your equipment name is on the side of that piece of equipment that they're going to repair. Where are they going to go? They're going to go to that equipment manufacturer's website, and they're the technician. They need that information. They're looking for the part. They're still going to give that part to a purchaser who may have never bought from you, and they are going to come in. So these journeys do need to be mapped even for the non-logged in user. It's a very common scenario today, for sure.
Love it. Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Dave, I'm actually going to come to you, and the question is going to be similar. When you are trying to segment this data, obviously, if you are going to be as crystal clear on your customer journeys, like Chris, where you can literally name off and you can map the journeys, but most companies struggle with this, to be honest. Okay, so how would you handle this? Let's say if you are mapping out your customer journeys.
Yeah, I mean, when Chris was talking, it would be wonderful if you had a clear segmentation, but taking a step further back and trying to answer your question, Sam, like from my perspective, you have to understand what your e-commerce site and what your marketing site is really geared towards and intended to do. And through that, understanding that customer journey and understanding from a traditional sense what those stakeholder groups look like, before you get into the marketing and e-commerce side of things, I think will help you with not only identifying the segmentation, but then also mapping the journey. Because kind of back to what Chris was saying, once you have that and you can understand what that entry point is, what that piece of information they maybe already have, and what the next piece of information is that they're coming to your website to look for, then it becomes much easier to finish the map and understand what the entire journey is going to look like from, kind of prospect or initial touch point, if you will, not so much prospect, but that initial touch point. What are they looking for? Did my solution answer what they're looking for, provide them with the information that they're looking for to continue moving them down that journey? So again, I think starting at the highest level from a traditional sense, understanding who the stakeholders are, how they need to utilize the interfaces that you're going to build. We can talk about e-commerce. We can talk about, just marketing websites, right? Same thought process. You have to understand that first before you can then get into the additional kind of clarifications of segmentation and ultimately documenting and creating what the ideal customer journey is based off of having those conversations. I mean, to me, what Steve had brought up in terms of not engaging the people that are actually going through the journey and not making assumptions. Sometimes the obvious is just, we get blinders on and we don't do things like that. But doing that is the best way to understand those touch points and the information that they're seeking to ultimately get them through the rest of the journey, on the road to conversion, right? For some people, you're going to learn that at the third step along that journey, they're going to want to talk to somebody to confirm. And regardless of what information you make available to them through the e-commerce or marketing portal, they still need to confirm that information with somebody internally. And then we want to make sure that because we've identified all the stakeholders, that we've provided internally that stakeholder with enough information to continue closing out that that particular sales process.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think, once a company launches their e-commerce site and they're continuing to refine their customer journeys, the best people to talk to are going to be the people who aren't using it, right? So they're going to continue to use those traditional methods, and the great questions go right to those people. So we have this e-commerce website. Why are you not using it? And that's where you'll uncover these areas that have created the friction for them and why they're not using it. So it goes back to talking to them, but they will continue to probably buy from you if your products are valuable to them. It's then learning from them when they're calling you instead of doing your new channel. So.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Dave, I don't know if you are going to have any follow-up comments there. But, my question to you is going to be, let's say if we go back to what Chris was talking about in her story. So if you are doing very specific story related to the personas, where you have the maintenance, technician, you have the procurement guy, you have the engineer, and you have mapped out all of these personas, the assumption here is going to be you already know who's coming to your site. But in most cases, you probably don't know who's coming to your site. Okay. So what you need to do is you need to provide the second dimension where the customers can still get in. And that is going to be, let's say, if you are doing the journeys based on role, but you have to also do journeys based on, let's say, if somebody's coming from a specific industry, or maybe they are coming from the specific industry group or whatever. So thinking about these different dimensions is typically trickier for a lot of companies. And in my experience, I think that's where they struggle. What would you say to that? Have you seen something similar or?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think they struggle because in too many cases that I've seen, um, they're trying to be too many things to too many people. So it confuses the journeys, even when it's segmented from, let's say, industry perspective or role perspective, because in some sense, they've launched an e-commerce or a marketing website without understanding who is really interacting and purchasing from them today. So again, I go back to what I kind of said originally, really understanding your business from a traditional sense and whether you already have something in place. I mean, most companies are going to have the marketing side of it, and some will have an e-commerce part of that, and some will not. But again, going back to the traditional sense and understanding who those segmented groups are, and then how to best position that from a journey standpoint. For some, that will be taking a industry approach and making it alphabetical. For others, it may be taking an industry approach and doing it, by kind of key focus areas from that industry perspective. I mean, it's kind of some of the things that we've seen while reviewing some of the ERP vendors out there. That's one of the things that comes to mind. So that would be my advice, though, for companies that are out there that are either looking to make a change to what they currently have, or they're just getting started on this journey, is to understand and be able to segment from a traditional sense before they start to go and put technology in place. And kind of just back to what Chris said quickly, I don't disagree with that, but from my experience, we're not going to get everybody to go online and to provide a specific journey without an ever increasing amount of technology. So I think that there is always a place to have that traditional sense of business and what that sales process is going to look like, and be mindful of the people and the groups that will not go down that journey. To Chris's point, you have to understand why that is. But I think more importantly, the people that are using the technology are who you want to talk to make sure that you kind of speak to both sides of that. So.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. And Ben, I'm actually coming to you, and I can see some of your comments, and you're like, I got technical term for everything that you are talking about because this is what I do. So, do you want to describe, the whole process of segmentation is what we are talking about, where you have seen challenges, because obviously you are seeing a lot of challenges, and that's what you fix for the companies, right? So, describe where companies really struggle with the segmentation.
Well, it often comes down to understanding where to start. We've talked about this before. Is like you don't know where to start. One of the things that I have actually a call with a client tomorrow to talk about is exactly that. How do you guide through the user experience the very, very different kinds of users of the site? Because in their case, not everybody who's a user of the site is actually a buyer, right? This is a manufacturer. And so the people who are actually buying from their site are going to be the businesses who are actually buying the pieces and doing the installations, right? But they've realized that one of the challenges they have is the people who are actually making the decision of what to buy are not the people who are in the business, right? So the way the people who are in the business navigate and think about the products and what they know about the products and the part numbers and the specifications, the way you motivate them is very different than the way you motivate the person who's actually going to go ahead and use it, right? Who's going to be making the ultimate decision. And so that's one of the big challenges. And then, just like what Chris was saying, another challenge that we've uncovered is that, so you've got the people who are doing the installation of the large scale, project delivery, which involves these products. But then you go back to the actual end, customer, right? Who's not the person who's doing the buying on this site, but they actually have people who are technicians who might be trying to maintain it. And so they don't need to buy the entire system, but they need to know how to efficiently find a part in order to fix one broken part. And so one of the fun things to do is to explore, again, how people are actually interacting with the site, because usually within the first few clicks, you can actually understand, right? For Chris's example, if somebody's finding a product and then looking at a technical document, they're probably somebody who wants to look at technical documents, right? And if there's somebody who's, the business user, they're thinking about the motivations for, the capabilities of something, right? Whereas if somebody is kind of the person who's implementing the solution, they're thinking not of capabilities, but they're thinking of features and specifications. So those are some of the common challenges that people have, is kind of, just to what Dave was saying, is that, when you live in that world, you get blinders on and you see everything through the view of your perspective, and you don't necessarily respect the outside perspectives. And so I like to encourage people to imagine that they're a fourth grader coming to the site for the first time, and they don't know anything, and they're just there to explore. And so put your hat on as somebody who doesn't know anything, but also that's kind of fun because it tends to encourage people to make things a little bit more engaging. Because as I said before, just one of the key aspects for success online is making sure that your user experience is compelling and engaging, because that's exactly why people aren't using your website, right? To Chris's point, the people who aren't using the website are not using it because it's not useful, right? It's not compelling to them to use it. For people out there who have a digital only business, they don't have a choice, right? It's either it's usable digitally or not, and that's make it or break it success. But we're now living in an age of digital transformation where lots of businesses who've been successful for 100 years, and they've always had those blinders on and seen things exactly the way they see them, and they think that that's how it's going to be successful. And in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of those businesses realize that that's actually a great way to drive your business into the ground.
Okay, amazing. So I am just going to have one follow-up question for you, because you made a very interesting comment and I would love to see some more clarification there. So the user versus buyer, I think that's a very important distinction. And sometimes the users could be far more important than the buyer because they are the ones who are actually influencing the journey as well as the deal. So when you are prioritizing your user experience, how would you sort of segment the user versus buyer when you are doing that?
Well, again, it's one of those things you can usually segment them without much effort by exploring their initial click paths, right?
Okay.
If somebody is the buyer, they're usually diving right into, in the first couple of clicks, they're diving into their normal process for buying, right? A buyer is usually somebody who's already been there before. Whereas somebody who's kind of exploring around the product set, if their first couple of clicks are in that area of content, then you can treat them differently. And there's no reason nowadays not to have a cookie and be able to then store that kind of initial guess of what segment a person is in, to understand what type of interaction best fits their needs. But you totally said it. It's like sometimes the user is the one who's actually driving the purchase decision, even though the buyer is the one making the purchase, right? And to what Chris was saying about different kinds of people, and in the B2B world, you might have a sophisticated account with 4 or 5 different levels of people in the buying process: the people who are doing the shopping, the people who are doing the reorders, the people who are doing the maintenance, the people who are approving the purchasing decisions, right? And the data that each one needs is going to be different, but there's no reason not to know what kind of person they are using cookies and login information.
Okay, love it. Thank you so much, Ben, for those insights. So now the only thing we can do right now is going to be super short closing advice. We have roughly 2 minutes. So we have roughly 30 seconds per person. So Steve, I'm actually going to start with you. What would be your closing advice?
If you and your team are confused about what your market segments are, go back and think about Clayton Christensen and what your customer's job to be done actually is. If you're selling drill bits, it's not just because they want holes, it's because they want a perfect hole every time. So think about that. Try and put yourself in your customer's shoes. Then you might realize you have 6 different types. Maybe you only have 1.
Okay, amazing advice there. Thank you so much, Steve, for that. So Chris, what would be your closing advice for today?
Yeah, I think as companies are taking this digital commerce journey, they need to think about what their goals are. And then from the goals, back into who is going to help them achieve those goals, and build the initial customer journey around those who, that's going to help them get to their goals. So, I think most companies have an idea of their ideal customer profile. So, and they know how they think and buy and the different segments within that. So it's really just challenging yourself to think about all the different ways that they're going to do something to help you achieve that goal that you're trying to get to. And this is iterative. You're going to start at one place. You're going to look at your data like we've talked about. You're going to look at the click paths. You're going to study the information. You're going to talk to your users and customers and feel out where those friction areas are, and you can keep improving it. So what you start with today is not where you need to end up with.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Dave, what would be your closing advice?
Yeah, kind of tacking on to where Chris was going. From the start, keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. You understand what the traditional sense looks like. You can start there and build upon that. Don't think that you've got to come out of the gate with a increasingly complex segmentation model. You can start simply, and as you gain data and gain insight into it, build upon that.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave. Ben, what would be your closing advice?
You can't manage what you can't measure. So like what Chris was talking about, start out with what your goals are that are measurable, right? I've heard from a few people, it's great advice. If the KPI doesn't have a dollar sign attached to it, nobody really cares. Okay. So think about what your goals are, start with that. And then like what Dave was saying, be agile and not be attached, right? I'm a big philosophy buff, and I'm a big fan of the concept of non-attachment. And so if you start off with something you can measure, right, and then you dive in without, as we mentioned, getting into analysis paralysis, not being able to understand which way to start, right, pulling out all your hair if you have any, right? And then you don't know where to start. So you start out with some place, but a place where you can measure the impact. And very quickly with these things, you're going to prove that you have a return on investment. So get buy-in from the organization that you're not just going to live with the return on investment you get on day one, but you're going to reinvest that, right? And next thing you know, you're going to have 30 data scientists because you'll realize it's actually worth it.
All right, amazing. So that's it for today, guys. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our e-commerce series for which we meet every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to e-commerce, and we always have a very exciting panel that is willing to share their insights and wisdom. So make sure you are not going to miss next week's show. We are going to be here. On that note, I wanted to thank you, everybody, for their time and insights today.
Thank you, Sam.
You. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you all.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Dave Chrysler, head over to thechrysler.club. It's THECRYSLER.CLUB. If you want to learn more about Steve Rice, head over to .comjungle.com. It's DOTCOMJUNGLE.com. If you want to learn more about Christina Harrington, head over to genalpha.com. It's GENALPHA.com. If you want to learn more about Ben Rudnick, head over to atwix.com. It's ATWIX.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Steve Rice, who discusses why congruence is the most important factor to optimize product category architecture, navigation, user experience, customer journeys, and campaign design. Also, the interview with Dave Meyer from Busy Web, who describes how marketing automation works and why that is important to understand customer journeys. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.